Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing series on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters, Levana Tenen, Michael Andron, and Daniel Gill. And once again, Adele Packer couldn't join us today, so we'll just plow on. So we're going to continue. This is part 2 of what we started last time. We're going through Stan's posters now, the graphic representations of his ideas and what was going on. This one that we chose is
dense.
Yeah, this one is pretty complex. And again, it's like seeing an outline of something in depth, Stan's thinking being shared, but in kind of a capsulated view. Gan Eden and Geometric Metaphor. I titled the program The Garden of Eden, the geometry in linear and cyclic time. So what we're really talking about here is what's referred to as geometric metaphor. And I think as we go through this, we want to try to keep that term in mind, geometric metaphor, and what that meant to Stan and his theories and his work. I think so much of it is based on this idea, and it's not being really presented in any other form that I've seen or anybody else who's really talking about this. So we went through the poster last time. As you can see, it's divided into sections, and we do have notes. Again, if you would like a copy of this poster and the notes, I'll put the information on the screen now, and go ahead and email me and I'll send you a PDF, and you can kind of follow along. So we went through A, B, and C. We're now on D, and he calls this the garden. Does somebody want to read the notes, or if not, I can do it.
I can read it.
Okay, so the notes for D.
Okay.
And I'll put the verbiage on the screen also.
All right. This illustrates that the garden, gan, has a numerical value of 53. The apex angle of the inverted T, as above so below, golden rule triangle, is 53 degrees. The two sides of the inverted T triangle can be identified with the two legs of the Masonic compass, which also form a 53-degree angle. This also identifies the triangle over the pyramid on the back of the US $1 bill and the triangular paving stones known as Herod's Triangle, found on the floor of Herod's second temple.
Okay, you don't have to read the reference. That's okay.
Wow.
Okay, so
that's actually an important thing, and unfortunately it's missing from this particular poster. So Bill, you can put that in. Yeah, these were actual paving stones from the location of Herod's temple, which this particular pattern of paving stones is not found anywhere else. And they include a triangle, which is basically the same as above, so below triangle. And just for people who are interested, there is reference work that's published scientific reference work on this particular triangle. Unfortunately, the article is only in Hebrew, but it does exist.
Okay. So I want to play, because this idea of the 53 degrees came up in another segment that Stan did. I want to play a portion of a video. This is on our site, meruvideo.com. And this is a series we did, video companions to the book, The Alphabet That Changed the World. And this was episode 1, A Prayer for Peace. Now, just to let you know, these were done like around, I think, 2018, 2019. Stan was in an advanced stage of Parkinson's. So we couldn't videotape him, but as you'll see, his mind was still pretty sharp. And we did audio tape, and then I just included graphics over his voice. All right, I'm going to start the video and prepare to be somewhat blown away. So let me go ahead and start this.
And I'm reading this, and I get to this. We can go get the text. I'll summarize it. This was written about 1800, roughly. Astronomy knew the size of the Earth, knew the size of the sun. This rabbi was educated. He was writing for educated people. And he says at one point, for example, the sun, whose body is finite and limited quantitatively, being approximately 167 times the size of the globe of the Earth. What? 167 times? The sun is 167 times the globe of the Earth? It's not true. And there's footnotes on the page in the Tanya, which attempts to rationalize this. They don't do a good job of it. We could read the quote. It is not plausible. So I'm looking at this number 167. What's 167 correspond to? Well, they're talking about globe of the Earth. They didn't just say Earth. They said globe. Well, that implies a sphere, a circle. And I knew from past experience that sometimes if I multiplied or divided by pi, I got a meaningful result. So I took 167 and divided by pi. And that gives me 53.1, give or take. The apex angle in the drawing of the triangle is 53 degrees. That's really suspicious, because that drawing, this inverted T geometry, makes sense of what the rabbi says.
So here's a statement from the Tanya. What is the Tanya, by the way? Anybody know?
Yeah, it's written by the Alter Rebbe of Chabad.
Okay, well, our audience doesn't know that.
It's written by the Alter Rebbe from Chabad.
Okay.
The founder of Chabad Hasidut, of that particular branch of Hasidism, wrote a masterwork. It's like the code book on Chabad Hasidut, which tends to be leaning toward a more intellectual view of the mystical world, as opposed to a more experiential dance and sing and reach it through that kind of joyfulness. Not that they don't, but tends to be a little bit more in the head. Chabad stands for Chachma Bina Da'at, which are the wisdom, understanding, and insight, which, or translated different ways, which are all intellectual sphirot. They are properties of energies that are mind energies, as opposed to heart energies.
Well, that kind of fits into it. Then here's a rabbi who's making this statement. I mean, why would he make this statement? Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, well, this is fascinating. I just learned this very recently. If you look in the notes on the in the Tanya, in what's called Likutei Amoraim, which is the collection of, literally means a collection of sayings or aphorisms. Like the point of the Tanya is that he's actually representing material from previous generations of Kabbalists in a way that his generation would understood and coming generations could study. And if you look, one of the first books he quotes is Shefatal. So like there's a direct, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that where he was getting it from because the quotes are similar, but he right out front, this is from Shefatal, and he quotes it openly. One of his main premises is actually from the Shefatal. So he was quite familiar with it. And I think there were like, I can't remember, 3 or 4 books that he said he couldn't live without. I think one of which was the Shefatal. It was like Shari Ora, Shefatal, Pardes Rimonim, and Eitz Chaim, something like that. Like it was just these were his like go-to for understanding the depths of Torah. And so a lot of the Tanya is really familiar with. So now it makes sense when you have Shefatal, And you have, and there's this deep connection, and Stan, who also had this incredibly deep connection to Shefatal. I mean, unbeknownst to him when he started, it's fascinating, and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're going to get into that in the next portion of the poster, where he shows us an example of Chef Fatal. But I mean, I'm just getting back to this. I mean, I didn't even see it when we recorded it, and then when I went back and edited this video, I mean, this to me is kind of mind-blowing that this rabbi would come up with this statement that made no sense until you applied pi and came up with the angle of the triangle.
His assumption was always that these people were smart, wise, and particularly in the case of people like the Alter Rebbe, educated. I mean, this was not anyone who would have been considered ignorant at the time. I mean, he knew the math, okay? And so the assumption was also that words were chosen very carefully, particularly by someone who was immersed in this body of learning that says the meanings of the letters themselves and the qualities that they portray are very important. And being, again, assuming that therefore the words were chosen very carefully for a whole lot of reasons. And so the idea was, okay, somehow for the Alter Rebbe, this statement made sense. He had a certain, he was educated according to the times, and therefore, what is a way in which this statement actually can make sense and fit in with the rest of the body of work that we know about? Stanley had already been, narrowing in on exploring the idea of numerical meaning in relationships in the letters in terms of either well-known natural constants like pi or ratios that referred to them. We have a whole section of information about that. And so he started exploring the words that were used. And lo and behold, came up, realized that this particular triangle, that the relationships and angles in this particular triangle were a part of the structure of the words that were used. I don't want to use words like either buried or encoded or all the kinds of things that people might normally use, because it's not respectful to the deep and complex body of knowledge that's being indicated here by the Alter Rebbe's writing. So that's kind of where Stanley was coming from, and that's turned out to be extremely fruitful in all kinds of directions, in terms of unpacking what was being written here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just imagining him reading this statement, and like he said, he's looking at this and says, what? That can't be right. And then he applies pi, and there it is,
Well, it took a lot longer than that.
Of course it did. It's still, and that holds true to everything we're doing here. We're synthesizing in this few minutes what Stan took years to develop. So that's part of and that enhanced his work on the inverted T triangle. It just reinforced something that he was trying to disprove. And every time he tried to disprove something, it had the opposite effect. And as I said before, there's a whole wall of posters in Levana's home that has that embedded in topics that are not necessarily related. Okay, so let's go down to D. And again, Levana, if you want to go ahead and.
Well, actually, D is what we just read.
Oh, so we're at E. Yeah.
We're at E. Yeah.
So let me zoom in on that, and I'll put it up on. And there's a little personal note that you'll appreciate here. So go ahead and read that.
Okay. The drawing illustrates the flow of information, negentropy, and loving kindness through the garden, extending a seed to a tree to a fruit, and extending the light of the sun to the plane of the earth. The letter chart below shows the relationship of the English words for grow, gradient, garden, grid, and grade. The letter Dalet, whose pictogram is a triangle, is identified with the Greek letter delta, and the delta extending and the delta extending a river into the sea. Below, in the left-hand corner, is a photo from the back of our apartment showing Galenas Creek flowing from the highlands of Marin County into the upper San Francisco Bay, Richardson Bay. So that's the view out of my rear window, where there is construction going on right now. So I'm going to mute myself.
So there's your Shefatal. Let me we're seeing it over here. But look at the other side, negentropy. Here's a term that doesn't come up too often in our everyday conversations. So let's take a look at this. It's negentropy is reverse entropy. It means things becoming more in order. By order is meant organization, structure, and function, the opposite of randomness or chaos. One example of negentropy is a star system, such as the solar system. Another example is life. So I guess Stan is using negentropy as a representative of a system of normality, I guess.
Just very briefly before, he's using negentropy as a non-religious way of saying the energy that keeps life going in the universe, the existence of organization as opposed to declining towards chaos, which is, assuming that the universe is eventually going to end in a whimper as opposed to a bang. What other metaphors can I use? I had a problem with him with regards to using the word negentropy. It took him a while to understand that people who are not scientifically trained tend to, hear the neg and they say, oh, something's declining, and they don't, because the word entropy is not a part of their vocabulary that they normally think of. Nonetheless, the book uses the term negentropy. And what he means in spiritual terms is can be equated to the flow of loving kindness that keeps our universe and our existence going. That's what he is referring to when he uses the term negentropy in this context.
Right. And so I think, let me put it back up on here. So we can then move to F, which is the Shefa part of that. Negentropy being outside, Shefatal being inside. And I'll read this. This expands on the idea of the gradient, the Shefatal, the flow of negentropy follows the gradient from the singularity of Hashem to the all-inclusiveness of Elohim, subtending all of creation. Shefa can also mean incline. Sefer Yetzirah uses the word emek, meaning valley or depth for gradient. And here, what is this? What is this line in Hebrew that he's quoting from? Does anybody know?
Those look
It's
like definitions.
Yeah, it's like a ramp. Could go to Masilat Barzel or Kavish. I think that's saying maybe a shipua is like the gradient of a ramp. It has a certain angle it comes down at. I think that's right.
Okay. These are quotes taken from, I guess he took them from the Alkali, from a Hebrew English dictionary, or from the Hebrew dictionary, actually. Yeah. Oh, I see. This was from a English to Hebrew to English dictionary. And in fact, you can see, even just looking at the outlines on the right-hand side of that, for the definition of for the Hebrew equivalent to the word of gradient or to flow, the Hebrew has a phrase in addition to a word. That's all that is. It's an expansion in Hebrew of how one would refer to a gradient in Hebrew to get an equivalent meaning.
Right, and any gradient's going to have an associated angle, whatever it is. I mean, it's just like you can't have one without the other.
Right.
So kind of the word shefa itself is implied. I mean, it implies an angle. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you can see, the Hebrew where he's got that he has outlined underneath the letter F, those three letters, or however, they all spell the word shefa. And Bill, if you could just sort of point out the samak, the pei, and the ayin, just so that people can be sure that those are the three same letters.
Yeah, Hebrew is a language of roots. So the first one is a noun. The next two are verbs. And if you look at the translation, you can see it's in the form of an infinitive: to incline, to emanate. Those are verbs, either intransitive or transitive verbs.
Mm-hmm. And dealing with the same three-letter root, the
shin pei ayin. Is he making some statement about those letters or their numbers or anything, or is he simply showing the derivation of the word shefa?
In this particular place, he is simply showing the derivation of the word shefa and how it can imply both gradient and flowing, and emanation. So yeah, there's nothing numerical here.
But geometrically, it's implying that it's not just a flowing river downward, but it's a flowing river like it would flow down a slant, which would then match up with his angle of the 53 degrees.
And also the idea of emanation, which at least in my, when I image things, that seems to involve like energy coming out of God knows where, it's just emanates. Yeah. And that is another quality that he is trying to imply for this, what he refers in his work as shefatal, the flow of negentropy, as he refers to it in his book.
Yeah, it's a steep angle too. I mean, it's a very steep angle, very quick angle. I mean, this is all super related to what people call the tree of life, the spherotic tree, and how those pipes, so to speak, how they flow. This really, I mean, this is it's just, again, it's like, it's classic. What's interesting about it is, again, that he very brilliantly relates it to angle and to geometry is super important because it's inclusive of the physical world, which is classically a Jewish idea. You know, you've got the Shefa coming down, but then you also have the elevation of what's down to up. It's not like either is better than the other. Actually, either or is kind of missing the other. You know, if someone is totally spiritual, it's very nice, but it's very hard to relate to. You know, or if someone's totally physical, you know, it's also it's very hard to want to relate to. You know, like it's like boring. You know, it's like okay. There's not much going on internally, and so I think it's very beautiful what he has here. That he's not negating the physical. Rather, he's explaining how the physical and spiritual work actually really are supposed to work together.
Yeah, it's back to inside and outside. If you go back to this information, this triangle up here, I mean, you go back to the beginning of our discussions back in episodes 1 or 2, and we talked about the bait representing inside and outside. And here's another representation of that all systems require this this complementary yet opposing principle. So inside, I mean, yeah, what you just said, negentropy is outside, something we can see and imagine, sunlight and earth. And inside is the process, seed, tree, and fruit. And we get back to, and then that's part of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge again. And we're going to look at that a little bit more when we get to, well, we're going to get into G right there. And here we have linear. Now we're getting into the aspects of time as represented in geometric metaphor. Let's see. So this section in the middle of the page summarizes the qualities of the two trees: the linear progressive evolutionary time of the tree of life versus cyclicity of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The cyclic earth plane is identified with the wheel of karma in some traditions and with the potter's kick wheel in Zohar. It models the idea of action and reaction, tit for tat, and what goes around comes around. And we talked about the wheel of karma in a previous episode versus the wheel of karma. And so, and then, well, the Plato quote is below that, but so now we're looking at in terms of time, linear time being the tree of life and cyclic time being the tree of knowledge. Cyclic time being more of like the earth plane, three-dimensional time ruled by the clock and the calendar, where linear time is never changing. It's always the same. Anybody have any thoughts on this aspect of time and how he's presenting it?
Well, I mean, you know, I mean, the linear time seems to be is obviously going from above to below. It's coming down. So it could be that it's just occurred to me right now, there could be like a concept of like essential time that's not time bound. I'm not sure what that is, but there's something essential about time that is not time bound. There's something internal to time.
Yes.
And as that comes down, it becomes more, it's linear from above, which is undefinable to a definable progression of evolution, maybe of the mind or of consciousness, as opposed to of something that's just like, you know, and now it's whatever time it is here, and it's, you know, it's 3:10 here, and it's whatever, and it's going to be 4 in an hour, and as opposed to that, it's like this. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah.
If you take this, it's helpful if you reference some earlier diagrams of this same as above, so below triangle, where he's got different labels on it, equating it with if you go back to the Shema, the, you know, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. That's this most common English translation. But the idea that that 5-letter name, Elohim, is which is traditionally associated with nature, therefore associated, you can imagine, with time experienced cyclically, the cycle of the years, the cycle of how the stars, the progression of how we view the stars. I'm blanking on the word, but whatever. And then the Hashem, the 4-letter name, being originating from out of time,
Right.
utterly infinite.
Right. Yeah.
The basically the possibility for the injection of novelty into this unchanging cycle.
Right.
That's, I think, that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. Now I'm remembering. So right. So God, right. It's the Fourier transform. I remember
Yes,
talking about that with Stan, and that
exactly.
it's the pulse has no extension over time, but it activates like everything within the spectrum. Right. But
Yeah.
and that's the Hashem, the line, the straight. It's beyond time. Right. So okay.
Yes.
So that does really make sense, and compared to what he's talking about, which would mean that there's just to get even deeper, there's the progression of the soul as it reincarnates, which is kind of beyond time in a sense. It's beyond time space. However, it takes place within time space.
Yeah.
And you could say the physical and the spiritual. There are a lot of ways to learn it, but yeah.
So the key term in terms of understanding what he's talking about in cyclic, I'm sorry, linear time, is that word in the middle there, now. So linear time is always in the now. It's always present. I did this. I did a video called "The Seeker's Guide to the Fourth Dimension," using fourth dimension as a metaphor, not as a technical term. And the way I defined it there was that 3-dimensional time is linear. That it's always moving, it's finite, ruled by the calendar and the clock, and that basically we exist in time, where the use of the 4-dimensional time is static. It's always in the present. It is infinite, and time exists, in this case, time exists in us, within us. So that's a distinction in terms of looking at 2 different elements of time. We only think of time as physical time, beginning and end, we born, we die. But people who are spiritually oriented or consciousness oriented understand that there is another time that is infinite, and that we're always in it, and it lasts forever, and that's our connection to oneness.
Yeah.
Now Stan was more technical in his way of expressing things, and but it's the same theory, and I think it's important that I think it's a perspective that's very important for people to understand, and Stan was right on it.
Well, in the Shefatal, again, this is like a diagram of how the Shefatal describes life. I mean, in terms of the soul and then the body and the relationship between the two, and how that relates to the godliness of the soul, and how that maps out over time. And this is like, and I mean, of course, the driver of all of it is the soul or God, or this spiritual aspect. And I mean, this just maps out, almost exactly. And according to the Tanya, also quotes that part of Shefatal. This is just a way of looking at it that adds literally a dimension by which, like, this almost could be used for, like, this sounds so weird maybe, but like spiritual technology, or like a technology that's based on consciousness, as opposed to like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, there are deeper, this definitely hints at some sort of, I think, some sort of very high level of real high technology, not just more and more tiny transistors.
I totally agree. And I also believe if you start with this concept of inside and out and you expand it, and that's what Stan's doing here. He's taking this idea and he's expanding it in various different examples, but in terms of using it for time, I think that this is a universal lesson that I think if people understood, would help a lot of people on a spiritual path, in terms of understanding the reality of the way things are.
And as I think I mentioned in the previous the previous video recording session, there has been work done which shows that when we as humans use our imagination to project ourselves in future time, different brain regions are used depending on whether you are projecting yourself linearly, like what's going to happen in 10 years when I'm however old I'm going to be in 10 years, which is in a sense linear, or when you're saying, oh, spring is going to come around again. What do I do in spring, which is in a sense cyclical, and that there actually are those pieces of imagination, a projection that you do as part of your imagination, actually use two different brain regions.
Wow.
And I mean, again, we came across that paper maybe 3 or 4 years after we were intensely discussing this.
Wow.
So that happened a lot.
Yeah, I think this is the way we're going. And I think that the direction that the more people understand these concepts, the more we'll get towards Stan's ultimate goal of peace, of understanding, of knowing that we're not just walking egos, that we all have this other element that is universal. It's all in the same place. It's all in the same plane of existence. So to illustrate it, he uses Plato, and here's his notes on that. Below the drawing is a reference from Proclus' discussion of Plato's Timaeus. Proclus was one of the last of the Platonists, if that's pronounced correctly. In his On the Timaeus, he attributes to Plato the same two qualities we have been discussing, represented here by the same two lines. Plato's Timaeus, 360 BCE, is more recent than the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, which is 458 and 445 BCE. And this suggests that Plato and perhaps Pythagoras before him gleaned their understanding from concepts associated with the Garden of Eden in Torah tradition. So here's the quote: things have a twofold nature, the one invisible, unique, simple and unworldly, and the other visible, multiple, varied, and distributed throughout the world. There are two kinds of energy, the one primordial, immovable, and intellectual, the other secondary, kinetic, and revolving in relation with the intellect. The one is free from cause and effect, the other contains them. Well, there are a lot of hints in terms of the ancient Greek philosophers understanding these concepts, and especially when you put it in the realm of Pythagoras, in which geometry emerged, it makes it even more relevant.
Yeah, it's definitely a pet peeve of mine, the Western kind of arrogant assumption that everything comes from the Greeks. There's no proof for that. There's just an assumption, because you can't, if you want to go dates, if you want to use dates as a proof, so then the Jewish civilization, or the civilization based on Torah in whatever form it was then, or however we had it at that point, predates the Greeks by quite a bit. And I think, again, the assumption that because there's a relationship with Kabbalah and Plato's philosophy, assumes that the Kabbalah got it from Plato. It's a lack of depth scholars who do that, no matter how much they know, are lacking in depth, quite honestly, of the profundity and depth of the Kabbalistic tradition. They just simply have no idea about how the texts match with each other, even from vastly different perspectives over time. Or, you know, the great assumption that, well, obviously Moshe de Leon is the one who wrote the Zohar, right? Whereas the Shari Ora quotes the Zohar, and it's a couple hundred, it's almost 300 years earlier, right? So the Shari Ora is quoting the Zohar before Moshe de Leon was ever even thought of. He was not even born yet, you know. And so they're again, it's a cursory study of things, and a study that fits in, quite frankly, with academic funding. If you come to an academic group and say, "Hey, I want to show you really some neat things," you know, actually could be that the Greeks actually got a lot of their stuff from the Jews. You're not going to get funded, and you're not going to be let into university. Period. And so again, it's touching on subjects that are tangentially related, but in terms of understanding and spreading understanding. There's a subtle and sometimes not so subtle anti-Semitism that exists within the academic world. And I think that this is something, and Stan never talked about it, although he did have some conflicts with the academic world, but yeah.
Encounters, yes.
Yeah. But you know, it's very possible he always judged people as much as he could on the side of merit. But it's very possible that some of the reason he got pushed back was because there's again a very subtle anti-Semitism, because academia really comes from the Christian world and from the Christian church,
but
which
also
has thousands of years of anti-Semitism.
And also, Daniel, also the fact that the rabbis didn't talk about this either. There's nothing really in Jewish literature. There's the association with the Greeks, but I've never seen any claim that the Greeks absorbed some rabbinic knowledge and was able to. Have you? I mean, does anybody?
There are sources for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely connections between the worlds. We know that the rabbinic movement specifically was deeply connected with Rome. They were advisors to kings and all sorts of things. And there are some sources that go even deeper in terms of actually Greek sources talking about the wise men in the East. And there's very serious work that actually those were Jews. These were not, you know, in the modern context, if you say wise men from the East, everyone maybe a little bit in a racist way thinks of people from, you know, East in Asia, you know. So oftentimes this is another problem in scholarship, is people take modern assumptions and throw them back thousands of years, you know. So there is actually some real notion that the Greeks actually got some of their idea, or at least there were connections. And my point isn't that it's necessarily us. My point is that when you're going back in history, you can't assume, you don't know. You can't say, well, obviously the Kabbalists got it from, well, why obvious? What, do you have a time machine? You know, you can go back and see you can't. And so when you have a scholarly trail for over 1,000 years, more even, because you can find these ideas in Masechet Chagiga, which goes back even more, which then goes back even more from before the destruction of the temple. When you've got a scholarly trail for 2,000 years approximately, that's something you can't say, well, they got it from, it's like, again, it's just so superficial. Like, they got it from the Greeks. Like, well, okay. I mean, like, you know, anyway, sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but I think it's important in terms of Stan's work.
And in terms of why, you know, for those 2,000 years, it wasn't generally talked about in the Christian world. All you have to do is look at history. Right. And, you know, realize that, I mean, you know, people wanted to live, and therefore they were not going to say, excuse me, you're wrong, to the people who were in control of their lives.
Yeah,
right, for sure.
Well, Stan did allude to this either in a presentation or maybe a discussion in terms of, you know, not saying for sure, but the possibility exists that the rabbis did study with Pythagoras when geometry was being developed. His point being was that what happened after that is what the Greeks did in basically turning these ideas into gods, physical gods that they started to worship. And once that happened, then the rabbis pulled out. they said, no, we
Well,
can't have this.
he also, to be fair, always made the assumption that even in reading Greek sources, one has to assume that those people who were actually wise understood the difference between physical reality and non-physical reality. I'll just put it that way, and but that as usual, when knowledge, information, whatever gets transmitted from generation to generation, very often what you wind up with is lowest common denominator. Also, to be fair, our knowledge, that this kind of what we popularly think of as Greek stuff or even Roman stuff, uh, in terms of our Western Northern European civilization, it was discovered during the Renaissance. And those people who are rediscovering it, reviewing it through a Catholic Christian lens. So you've got layer upon layer of cultural assumptions in terms of what were these people back in, the pre-Christian era, what were they actually thinking? Well, you have to kind of work your way through several different layers of cultural presumptions in terms of translation in order to even have a clue about getting back there.
That's a great point.
Which is one of the things that I personally think is so marvelous about the tradition that we're discussing here, which is that at least there is a central connection: study of Torah, study of the word, study of the letters. There's a central connection that in some regards you're dealing with not the same surface culture, obviously, but there's an internal connection that is the same, that people, so that there is perhaps less cultural distortion if you look through the lens of this Jewish traditional material going back and back and back and back, that at least there's the central thread that's common, even though you've got wildly different cultural surroundings, whether you're in North Africa or the Middle East or France, or, and what era you're in, what the particular cultures were dealing with, what they were eating, what clothing they were wearing, how cold it was, how warm it was, all those things are different. But the central thread of what they revered, what they feel is important, and where they go back to as a touchstone is this same thing.
Right.
Even the Karaites, there's the Torah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back. I mean, this is the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. I mean, the Isaiah scroll. It's thousands of years old. It's almost exactly the same Isaiah we have now.
And so what I'm saying is that in terms of, how close is what we have now to an original intention, basically that we're dealing with fewer layers of different cultural lenses. Somewhere at the beginning of it, there is a central cultural lens, which means that I guess one would say that our point of view on these documents, on this knowledge, can be more reliable if we pay attention, because there's less cruft.
Right. And what Stan emphasized was that at this geometric level, we don't have the cultural bias. And
that's also true.
And that's, I think, how we are asking people to look at this work and see that what our connection is to the ancient world thinking, and everything that occurred between the Greeks and today. And obviously the last 2,000 years has been all about cultural bias. And that's why so much of this has gotten lost through the ages. Yes, Michael.
before I say what I wanted to say, I just to comment on what you've been talking about. There are plenty of times where one culture finds a symbol or finds a piece of knowledge, and they say, this will help me explain something that I'm already talking about or that I understood. In some cases, diametrically opposite from what they found.
Mhm.
Just because this culture had it and this culture had it doesn't mean they're using it in the same fashion.
Right.
I was looking at this diagram in G, which is the one that has the conical shape, the as above, so below, right there in the middle, with the line down the center that says now. And I looked at this differently, I guess, because one of my teachers used to refer to a particular state of consciousness as the eternal now. That was a place that if you wanted to tap into higher wisdom, you were in the world of the eternal now. That's like the pillar, that vertical line is the pillar. And then once you know with an eternal now and an eternal oneness, if you know where it's coming from, then being able to take that oneness and subdivide it and bring it down into the world of multiplicity becomes more understandable. When you looked at the original 53 as the, aside from all the things that we talked about that it represents, the initial number there says Gan, as in Gan Eden, Garden of Eden. Over here, I don't know if my thing works. Yeah, right over there. Okay. While I was looking at this, and then we got to the Shefa Tal, I did another gematria on the word Tal. He has all this stuff about Shefa, about its different roots and so on. And then Tal, which is boxed in Hebrew and English down there, has a gematria as well. It's 39. And 39 is not an unimportant number. First of all, if you have to take, you can go off the chart now. 39, if you take Shabbat, the only ritual commandment in the 10 Commandments, and don't do work on Shabbat. Work is divided up into 39 categories, which is an interesting choice of numbers. And those are supposedly the things that were done when they were building the tabernacle in the desert. 39 exactly, like there was not one more thing that they were doing. Taking out the garbage might have been one that wasn't in the 39. And then there are children of those 39, like derivatives of those 39. But here's the thing about 39. Two of the most important words in the Shema, Hashem Echad, God is one, is 39. And when we count the number of turns in the fringes of the talus or the tzitzit, okay, the first you have 7 and 8 and 11, that's 26, Hashem, and the next one is 13, which is Echad. Even that place from the little circle where the tzitzit are tied down to 8 strands is a representation of the same picture, but only if you're operating from that world of the eternal now. And so I don't just see it as a linear, like right now, as opposed to 5 years ago. To me, that's an eternal, a pillar of eternal nowness, I guess.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And then from that is this influx of a drop of dew, which is what Tal means. It's dew, as opposed to rain, D-E-W. And that, the influx from the oneness, the Aleph at the top to the Bet world at the bottom, or the Taf world at the bottom, depending on how you want to delineate it. I think the picture says even more then, because what it's saying is, okay, look, this, once we get to the world of 53 and we get to the world of this dividing up and slanting things down, we're bringing it down into this world. But you have to remember that your soul is in the eternal now. And that's the support pillar that is there. And when you take away the two angles, you have simply the inverted T. The inverted T is saying, okay, this is the core. The core is we're in the eternal now, and we're in a place of one consciousness. Hashem is echad. God is one. It's like time and space, except they're both oneness. They're eternal. They don't change. Now, as you start to draw those lines, then everything starts to move. That's like the button that somebody pushed in that perfect world of T, which has never really come out as a perfect world in our human history, because whenever there might have been that in nature, humankind screwed it up. So once that starts and the spiral comes down, the picture that you have in D, if you throw it up one more time, that spinning thing over here at the bottom, okay, that's where it starts to spiral. That's where the shefa, the slant comes. But what we don't see in that spiral is the vertical line that's inside of it, that is keeping that perfectly symmetrical as it works its way down, is that one constant. So when you start talking about pi or other constants in the universe, the constant here is the eternal now and the oneness. That's the constant. And I think all of these ancient schools got it. By the way, if you go Eastern, it depends on where you're starting from as to what's in the East. Okay.
Well, assuming you're starting in Greece.
Yeah.
It's right. It's right there.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah,
right
it's
to
right
the
across the
east.
street,
Right
yeah.
there. Yeah, straight
But
line east.
I heard a Columbia scholar of ancient languages and a lot of this stuff make the link between the Brahmin tradition, which is who would have held it in India eastward, and Abraham. Brahmin and Ibrahim
Yes.
had their phonetic roots. And when Abraham sent his children eastward with gifts, the children of Keturah sent them eastward with gifts, that the gift was the knowledge of the oneness. It was the yichud. And the commentaries actually say that. Rashi says, what was it? And the Maharsha comes in and says, it was Shem Tumah, an unsacred pillar, because Shem also means pillar, as in Yad Vashem. And when you're doing that pillar, when you're building that pillar, the commentary on that commentary says it's yichud b'li mitzvot. It's the unification, the oneness of God without the mitzvot that we do in Judaism. Okay, that's what he sent with that branch of the family eastward.
Interesting. Okay, Michael, I need to move on here because I want to finish off the poster. We have 3 more elements. We can do them all at one time. So let me put that up here. So we're looking at over on the right, I, J, and K. This is a NASA rendering of a black hole showing the emergence, Shefa, of a twisted column from its core. The twisted column suggests the tetrahelical column, a geometric metaphor for a tree or a vine or an umbilic. So that's the black hole. This is the J, the unit yardstick. The twist in this model of a tree of life column is equivalent to the 99 tetrahelical column from a 310 torus knot. That's covered in the book. So if you have the book, you definitely want to.
Yeah, if you can understand it from the book.
Yeah.
It's tough. That's tough.
And if you don't understand geometry, don't worry about it. Just think about it as eights, the tree, and just know that there's a whole lot of other stuff embedded in that.
But it is very interesting to look at that illustration in the book and see what those 99 tetrahedrons represent. And then K, this illustrates how the Garden of Eden triangle extends over all time, from the Big Bang to the Big Whimper, the heat depth of the universe, with a cyclicity of the Earth plane measuring off intervals of progressive time. This grid can also be interpreted as latitude and longitude. This is the very definition of geometry. Geo equal Earth and metry equal measure. So he kind of brings it all around to this concept of geometric metaphor.
Yeah, it's I mean, perhaps as the universe gets, physically dissipates over however many billions of years or whatever, the spiritual universe gets stronger. So meaning as conscious creatures, we rise, and then the physical universe has, when we reach the point of whatever that's supposed to be, the physical universe that we know it doesn't have any purpose anymore. So kind of you could see it as opposite. So the physical universe is whimpering out, so to speak, but the spiritual universe within that, which is the whole purpose of the physical, is getting stronger. Mm-hmm. I never thought of that. It's very interesting. There also are some technological implications of this whole thing of these crossing, magnetic fields and electric currents, and there's all sorts of neat stuff going on right now in physics and applications of things that look very much like this.
Yeah.
But in a completely more of a physical way. But it's just fascinating, the connections,
Yeah, and that's something that we always used to discover. I have discontinued pretty much looking at the science news announcements for every week, but in fact, it was one of the things that Stanley used to enjoy very much, was relating these kinds of geometric metaphors and congruences that he found in these ancient spiritual texts with the kinds of discoveries that Daniel was just talking about, progressions in thinking in physics, in biology, in genetics, all kinds of different fields, in studies of consciousness and AI. And so, yes, it's almost as if, on a sort of a grand scale, similar metaphors occur at particular times in the world culture or consciousness, and awareness of different kinds of relationships happen in many different fields at once. It's sort of the same idea as, it's long been known that inventions tend to arise in several different places at the same time. That in a sense, it's as if there's a need for a certain particular kind of perspective, then that perspective will wind up arising in as many fields as it possibly can. Mm. Not everybody is someone who focuses on, hey, what's congruent with this process and that process and that process in these different fields. Stanley happened to be somebody who that was just how he thought. And so he could cross-connect these different fields and in his own research allow the discoveries in one field about these processes to enrich and inform his studies in a different field. Not many thinkers are that way, but some of them really are.
So we've really gone way over our time, but I do want to, based on what you were just saying, Lavana, I want to take this opportunity to share our dream being, our immediate dream being to get all of this stuff digitized. The reason being, and this is a long-term project, that is going to require, funding. The reason and what we have when we have this digitized is the ability to cross-reference all these ideas, so that when we click on the unit yardstick, the tree stick spectrum, it brings us to all the different references that we're talking about. And like I and I'm talking a lot to our friend Tad about the uses of AI to help us do that, to gather information and to be able to get the relationships between all these ideas in our hands. And that is going to be of extreme value beyond our current comprehension. And finally, give justice to Stan's work in the ability, because again, just based on what we've been talking about with Michael and Daniel and Lavana, you're bringing up all these different ideas. Imagine the ability to be able to click, cross-reference, and bring this all into one study. And it's an endless task, but we want to begin doing that. And we are seeking funding for that, among many other projects we have. But that is the keynote project, getting this organized, digitized, and then arranged in a way that we all have access to it. But for today, thank you for watching. I hope you've hung in there till the end. It just shows you that this one poster took up 2 episodes, over 2 hours of discussion. And I'm sure we could carry this on beyond, but we don't want to stretch the limit of our audience. So thanks for watching. Next time we'll be taking up another poster, and we'll delve into it on the same level. Thank you guys so much. You all are contributing so much information and enhancing Stan's work here. So again, we will push on next time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.